The lights did not just shine tonight, they burned. The air inside the face-off studio was electric, humming with a pressure you could feel in your bones. Tonight, history was not made, it was rewritten. Karoline Leavitt, the sharpest young political force in America, went head-to-head against none other than Cherilyn Sarkisian, the legendary Hollywood icon and lifelong voice of the progressive elite. But what unfolded was not just a debate, it was a demolition. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the latest stories. Trust me, you are going to want front row seats for what comes next. In a moment that left jaws dropped across America, Karoline unleashed a bombshell so savage, so surgically precise, that Cherilyn, the woman millions worshipped, stood, frozen under the stage lights, her legacy crumbling in real time. No one saw it coming. Not the host, not the roaring audience, not even Cherilyn herself. By the end of the night, it was not just a clash of words. It was a full-blown generational coup. The past desperately clung to the microphone, and the future ripped it away. If you thought Hollywood legends could survive on nostalgia forever, tonight proved the future has no patience for the past, and the whole world watched it happen, live. The Face-Off studio was transformed into something unrecognizable. Not a talk show but an arena. Massive stadium lights crisscrossed the ceiling like swords, slicing through the haze of artificial smoke that curled along the stage floor. The spotlights circled, panned, and locked onto the glittering center of the set, bathing it in an unforgiving white glow. The music thumped deep and primal, vibrating the air itself. It was not the polished background score of a news segment. It was the pounding heartbeat of a fight night, low, relentless, rising with every second. Above, camera cranes swooped and hovered like vultures circling a battlefield. Their mechanical arms twisted, zoomed, and refocused, capturing every angle, every nervous glance, every bead of sweat forming under the heat of the lights. The audience was not the usual polite TV crowd. This was different. They were packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, a sea of expectant faces locked onto the empty stage. No casual chatter, no shifting in seats, just a collective sharp breath, held like a glass about to shatter. Some gripped the edge of their chairs so tightly their knuckles whitened. Others leaned forward unconsciously, drawn in by a gravitational force they could not resist. Every eye gleamed under the harsh lights, wide and unblinking. Tonight was not just entertainment, tonight was a collision. Above the set, a massive LED display flashed the show's logo, Face Off, in pulsing red and white, almost taunting the combatants who were about to enter. The words flickered with a subtle, sinister energy, syncing perfectly with the heartbeat of the bass-heavy intro track. From the backstage tunnel, footsteps echoed, sharp, deliberate. Producers whispered frantically into headsets. Cameramen adjusted their angles one last time. The stagehands froze in place, clearing the battlefield for the real contenders. The swirling lights slowed their chaotic dance, then focused into two perfect columns at opposite ends of the stage. Two spotlights, two warriors, two destinies, about to collide. One side, Cherilyn Sarkisian, cloaked in decades of celebrity armor, the weight of fame stitched into every step. The other, Karoline Leavitt, burning with the energy of a generation that had been underestimated for far too long. The final moment before liftoff crackled in the air. The audience, sensing the tidal wave of history about to crash over them, collectively leaned in, jaws set, hearts pounding. Not a single cough, not a single whisper, only the electric hum of anticipation thick enough to taste. And then, the host stepped into the white-hot center, standing tall between the two swirling spotlights. The music hit its peak. The lights froze. The world seemed to stop breathing. For just a second longer, it was time. The opening words had not yet been spoken, but already the battle lines were drawn. The past, the future, the stakes could not be higher, and no one was leaving untouched. The host swept onto the stage like a force of nature, not a smiley, neutral referee, but a ringmaster standing at the center of the most anticipated brawl of the year. He paused at the very center, boots planted wide, soaking in the electricity of the crowd. The cameras zoomed tight, catching the glint in his eye, a glint that promised fireworks. He raised the mic slowly, like a general about to declare war. "Tonight," he began, voice slicing clean through the buzzing air, You are not just watching another debate, you are witnessing a collision between two Americas. The audience rumbled, a low, restless sound, like thunder rolling over distant mountains. He paced once, turning slowly to face each side of the studio. His voice cracked like a whip. On one side, a legend of the entertainment world, an icon who shaped decades of music, film, and activism, Cherilyn Sarkisian. The crowd erupted. Cheers, whoops, scattered applause swelling up like a wave. He pivoted sharply, locking eyes with the other end of the room. And facing her, the sharpest young voice of the America First generation, the unstoppable, Karoline Leavitt. A second eruption, louder, more feral, younger voices punching the air. The host smiled thinly, sensing the perfect storm building. Tonight the battle lines are clear. Immigration, economy, patriotism, generations, the future itself. He let the words hang, heavy and undeniable, then dropping his tone to a whisper almost lost in the roaring silence. And it all starts now. The stage lights narrowed into two brutal spotlights. The music cut. The world froze. The first words were about to be spoken, and America would never forget them. The lights narrowed to two brutal spotlights, slicing through the haze like twin blades. At the host's sharp nod, Cherilyn Sarkisian took the first step into the white-hot circle. She clutched the microphone tightly, maybe too tightly, as if it was a lifeline. Her face, usually glowing with Hollywood polish, now carried the raw intensity of a woman on a mission. The host's voice rang out, clear and cutting. Cherilyn, immigration policies under the previous administration have stirred massive controversy. Tonight America's listening. What's your message? Cherilyn inhaled sharply, her shoulders rising like a wave about to crash. Her voice, when it broke the silence, trembled under the weight of emotion. This is not just about politics, she began, voice thick with restrained tears. This is about families, ripped apart. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Mothers, fathers, children. She paused, visibly struggling against the welling emotion. Dreamers who only wanted a future, now forced to live in terror. Her voice cracked. She pressed forward, eyes flashing. I have sat with mothers who lost everything, fathers deported in the dead of night, children screaming for parents they'll never see again. The words hit the audience like stones. Gasps, whispers. One woman in the second row wiped away a tear. Cherilyn raised her hand, almost pleading. This is not the America I know. This cruelty is not who we are. Scattered applause broke out, passionate, unfiltered, desperate. The host leaned forward, his smile sharp as a razor. And Karoline Leavitt, your response to this humanitarian crisis? Karoline stepped forward into her own harsh beam of light, calm as a seasoned warrior. No trembling, no tears, only iron focus. She spoke, voice clear and surgical. I deeply empathize with the emotions Cherilyn has expressed. A slight murmur rippled again. Was she conceding? But, she continued, slicing through the room like a blade, policy cannot be built solely on emotions. A silence heavier than steel settled over the room. Karoline turned slightly, addressing the entire crowd now, her words firing like precision strikes. Illegal immigration costs the American taxpayer over $200 billion a year. Studies from Harvard and MIT show that it depresses wages, especially for our most vulnerable workers. Hospital emergency rooms are overwhelmed. Public schools are stretched thin. Criminal gangs exploit open borders. Each fact cracked through the studio like gunshots. Cherilyn blinked hard, her fingers tightening on the microphone. Karoline's voice grew sharper, colder. Compassion for illegal immigrants must never come at the expense of American citizens, the forgotten families struggling to survive in the heartland. The audience, once so firmly swayed by Cherilyn's heartbreak, now found itself torn. Nods appeared. A man near the front pumped his fist quietly. Even some clappers hesitated, glancing uncertainly between the two women. The host, sensing the volatility, cracked his voice through the tension. Karoline, he pressed, how do you justify policies that critics say tear apart innocent families? Without missing a beat, Karoline answered, calm, brutal, untouchable. I justify protecting the sovereignty of our nation, she said, locking eyes with the host, and, through him, the audience. If we abandon our borders, we abandon our nation itself. Gasps. One woman in the crowd dropped her program. Someone else whispered, she's right, loud enough to echo. Cherilyn jumped back in, desperation sharp in her voice. You talk about sovereignty while children are ripped from their parents' arms. She pointed dramatically, her voice rising like a crescendo. This isn't a nation. It's a nightmare. Cheers erupted from Cherilyn's side, but only for a heartbeat. Karoline stood silent, letting the moment hang. Then she delivered the hammer blow. Every nation enforces borders, Cherilyn, she said, voice low and lethal. Without law and order there is no dream, only chaos. The words echoed like a death knell across the stage. Silence blanketed the crowd again. The host, gleeful at the brewing storm, pounced with another spicy jab. If compassion and law clash, Karoline, which one wins? Karoline smiled, not arrogantly, but with the steely composure of someone who had thought through this war long before stepping onto the battlefield. True compassion, she said, voice slicing the silence clean, is rooted in protecting the dreams of all, not sacrificing American workers on the altar of political performance. The right side of the audience, Karoline's supporters, exploded in thunderous applause. The left side fidgeted, shifting in discomfort. Cherilyn's face flashed with anger, sorrow, and exhaustion all at once. She clutched the mic again and shot back. "Where is your heart, Karoline?" The question rang in the air, desperate, defiant. Karoline stepped forward slowly, deliberate. "My heart," she said, voice soft but unbreakable, "beats for the children of America, the ones whose futures are being stolen every day by lawlessness." Gasp. You could hear the oxygen being sucked out of the room. A second later, boom, a roar of applause erupted, drowning out even the pounding bass from the studio speakers. The host threw up both hands, grinning wide. "Hold on to your seats, America," he shouted above the chaos, because that was just the beginning. Karoline stood still, letting the last wave of noise fade into a low electric buzz. The host, sensing something coming, stepped back instinctively, like a man stepping away from a lit fuse. Karoline lifted her mic slowly. No shout, no scream, only a voice as steady and sharp as a blade. "Compassion," she began, her eyes slicing through the darkness. "Without responsibility," she paused, just long enough to make the entire room lean in, breathless, "is just chaos." Silence. No, not silence. A different sound, a collective, audible gasp, as if a trapdoor had just opened under the entire studio. The audience recoiled, some with widened eyes, others with hands clamped over their mouths. You could feel it ripple through the rows like a shockwave. A man in the third row muttered, "Oh my God," under his breath. A woman near the front grabbed her friend's arm instinctively like a jump scare just hit. Cherilyn stood frozen, blinking hard, searching for a comeback that refused to arrive. The host gave a low whistle, barely audible over the stunned crowd. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath, zooming in tighter, capturing the moment like a crime scene photo. Karoline lowered her mic slightly, her expression cold and unshaken. She did not need to say anything more. The damage was already done. The air inside the face-off studio was still charged from Karoline's mic drop, but the host, ever the chaos conductor, cracked his voice through the tension. "America's working families are hurting," he said sharply. "Prices are rising, the cost of living is exploding. Tonight, we confront the economic war zone." He pivoted towards Cherilyn first, microphone raised like a referee restarting the round. "Cherilyn, you've been very vocal about tariffs imposed under President Trump. Your words on social media were blunt. Tariffs crush the poor. Explain your stance to America." Cherilyn seized the moment like a battle cry. She stepped forward into her spotlight, eyes blazing, voice riding the edge of rage. "Tariffs are a direct assault on struggling Americans," she declared, her words snapping like whips across the room. "They make basic goods, milk, bread, clothes, unaffordable." She paced 2 steps, waving her hand furiously. "I've spoken to single mothers choosing between groceries and electricity. I've met retirees forced to skip meals." Her voice broke slightly, perfectly timed for emotional impact. "Trump's tariffs aren't protecting workers. They're punishing families," she roared. "And Karoline, if you think this is building America, you're delusional." Thunderous clapping erupted on Cherilyn's side. Foot stomps, whistles, scattered shouts of "speak it" filled the air. The host, smiling slyly, immediately swung the mic toward Karoline. "Karoline Leavitt, do tariffs protect jobs or punish the poor?" he asked, voice dripping challenge. Karoline stepped forward without hesitation, her heels striking the floor like war drums. Her voice, clear, cool, deadly. I appreciate Cherilyn's passion, she began, allowing the tension to simmer. But America needs more than passion. It needs facts. A murmur rippled across the room, anticipation sharpening. Karoline lifted her hand, counting off facts like loading ammunition. Since tariffs were imposed, over 50,000 jobs were added to the steel and aluminum industries. American manufacturing saw its first revival in decades. Dependency on Chinese imports dropped by 16%. She lowered her hand slowly, locking eyes with Cherilyn across the stage. Those are not dreams. Those are results. The right side of the crowd roared in approval, younger voices louder now energized. Cherilyn jumped back in, voice dripping indignation. Jobs in Ohio don't help mothers who can't afford diapers, she snapped. Tariffs raise prices for everyone. Karoline waited, silent, composed, until Cherilyn finished. Then she delivered her next strike. Short-term price fluctuations, she said, are a strategic sacrifice, not a failure. Her tone sharpened like a blade. Would you rather Americans have cheap goods made by foreign labor, while their own communities collapse? Boom. A visible shudder moved through the audience. The host, eyes gleaming, threw another gasoline-soaked question. Karoline, are you saying struggling families today should suffer for possible gains tomorrow? Karoline turned to him without flinching. I'm saying struggling families deserve jobs more than cheap trinkets. Applause erupted again, louder now, stronger. A wave building. Cherilyn's face twisted, and she rushed back toward her microphone. Tell that to the families starving now, she shouted, voice cracking with fury. Tell that to the mother crying at the grocery store. Tears rimmed her eyes again. Another powerful emotional strike. Some in the crowd clapped sympathetically. Others shifted uncomfortably, caught between head and heart. The tension thickened until it was almost suffocating. Karoline stepped into the center of it all, completely unfazed. She spoke slowly, slicing the moment in half. People cannot afford groceries without paychecks either, Cherilyn. Her voice was calm, almost pitying. She took one deliberate step closer. And tariffs are paychecks. Factories reopening in Pennsylvania, that's groceries. Steel plants rehiring in Ohio, that's school supplies. Manufacturing jobs, coming home, that's stability. The left side of the room sagged under the weight of her words. The right side exploded, fists pumping the air. Chants of, USA! USA! Breaking loose. The camera zoomed tighter, capturing Cherilyn's paling face, Karoline's unshakable fire. The host, grinning like a wolf, barked into the roaring crowd. This is not just a debate. This is the soul of America. On the line, lights pulsed, music undercurrents throbbed. The studio was an earthquake, barely holding itself together. Cherilyn, desperate, tried one last counterattack. You care about factories but not about people, she snapped. You're sacrificing families for steel beams and slogans. Karoline turned, face almost sorrowful. I care about giving families a future, she said, voice soft but unrelenting, not handing them temporary sympathy and permanent poverty. The words cracked across the room like a whip. A woman near the front actually gasped out loud. Someone in the back dropped their coffee, splattering across the floor unnoticed. The host raised his hand, commanding silence. You've heard the arguments, he boomed. You've heard the passion, but only one of these two is speaking with numbers, and the other is speaking with nostalgia. He paused dramatically, letting the divide settle into every corner of the studio. Which side does America believe? He whispered. That answer is coming. The music rose, the lights pulsed harder, and the battle marched into its next brutal round. Karoline let Cherilyn's last desperate words hang in the air, brittle, vulnerable. The crowd was buzzing, shifting, uncertain where to lean. Then Karoline moved, just a half step forward, enough to dominate the space without seeming aggressive. Her voice low, precise, sharp enough to cut glass. People, she began, pausing deliberately, cannot buy groceries. Another pause, the kind that forces everyone to lean in, hearts pounding, without a paycheck either, Cherilyn. Boom. The studio recoiled, not loudly but sharply, like the air itself had been punched. A single, stunned gasp shot from the front rows. Someone dropped their program onto the floor with a slap that echoed through the frozen silence. Then, scattered clapping, small at first, timid, then growing, building like a storm surge as the reality of her words sank deeper. Cherilyn blinked, rapidly, her mouth opening, then closing, like a performer suddenly forgetting her lines. The host, sensing the seismic shift, simply stepped back, letting the moment rip through the studio unfiltered. No commentary needed, no rescue. Karoline stood silent, letting the weight of her words do the work, letting the truth, brutal, unvarnished, settle into the bones of every single person in that arena. For a moment it did not feel like a debate. It felt like a funeral, the funeral of old, empty rhetoric. The host stepped forward again, feeling the mood of the crowd shift like tectonic plates grinding underfoot. He knew what was coming, and he grinned like a man lighting a fuse at both ends. He turned to Cherilyn, microphone slicing the space between them. "Cherilyn," he said, voice deceptively smooth, "4 years ago you vowed that if Donald Trump won the presidency, you would leave America." He let the words hang, heavy and accusatory. The audience stiffened, their focus sharpening like a blade being honed. The host pivoted sharply toward Karoline. "And yet," he continued, a theatrical pause stretching the tension taut, "you're still here, criticizing, fighting, influencing." He spun back toward the crowd, voice rising. "So the question, America, who do you trust?" The studio exploded in a low roar. Not cheers, not boos, but a hungry murmur like wolves catching the scent of weakness. Cherilyn stiffened. She gripped the microphone tighter, her mouth pressing into a thin line. You could almost see her calculating, fighting for footing on a stage that had just tilted violently against her. She raised the mic, voice trembling with a mixture of pride and defiance. "I stayed because I love this country," she declared. "I stayed because running away wasn't the answer. I stayed because I needed to fight for justice." From within, scattered applause, some cheers, but it was thinner now, weaker. The bass was eroding. Karoline waited. No rush, no anger, just calm, brutal patience. When the moment was ripe, when the air was choking on unspoken doubt, she stepped forward. Her voice was low, surgical. "You did not stay to fight," Karoline said. "You stayed to perform." Gasp! The room stiffened again. One collective inhale, sharp and painful. Karoline continued, walking forward slowly, eyes locked on Cherilyn like a predator studying a wounded animal. "You vowed, before millions of Americans, that if Trump won you would leave." That was not just a rant, that was a promise. Her voice never rose. She never pointed. She did not need to. Millions believed you. Millions watched, expecting you to stand by your word. Painful as it might have been, but when the time came, you stayed. Karoline let the last word fall like a dead weight onto the floor. It echoed. It lingered. The host, wide-eyed, let her keep rolling. He knew better than to interrupt this execution. Karoline's voice dropped lower, more personal now, almost pitying. "And now you want the same Americans to believe you again, to trust your new promises, to follow your new warnings." She paused, not for breath but to let the knife twist a little deeper. But promises mean something. She looked slowly around the audience, making eye contact with as many people as possible, especially when trust in this country is breaking apart. Cherilyn opened her mouth and closed it, stepped forward, then hesitated. You could see the collapse beginning behind her eyes. Karoline struck the final blow. "Words without actions," she said, voice like a judge delivering a death sentence, "are just noise." Boom! The audience snapped, applause shattering the air like breaking glass. Not polite claps, fierce, eruptive claps. Some stood, some shouted Karoline's name. The momentum had swung, and it was not coming back. The host, grinning so wide, it almost looked villainous, stepped into the chaos and cracked his mic like a whip. "America, you heard it here. Words without action are just noise, and tonight you have to choose who speaks truth and who performs." The music surged, the lights flared, the stage pulsed with energy so thick it felt like it could physically knock people over. Cherilyn stood there, frozen, her legend crumbling under the hot glare of a new generation's cold, ruthless expectations. Karoline simply stepped back, folded her hands calmly in front of her and waited. No gloating, no theatrics, just silent, devastating victory. The studio lights were still hot, the stage still buzzing, but the real battle had already shifted to the screens. Phones lit up instantly, 1,000 little suns igniting across the audience, reflections flickering in wide, stunned eyes. Thumbs blurred against glass, screens scrolled at dizzying speed, and within minutes, the internet went nuclear. TikTok blew up first, clips of Karoline's cold-blooded takedown. "Words without actions are just noise," exploded across the platform like wildfire. Slow-mo edits hit the FYP within seconds. Karoline stepping, Forward under flashing lights, Cherilyn freezing like a deer in headlights, dramatic bass drops timed perfectly with the mic drops. Karoline V's Cherilyn trended at breakneck speed, captioned with memes like, POV, you just witnessed the fall of a Hollywood queen. On X, formerly Twitter, it was a frenzy. Trending hashtags lit up the site like fireworks. Or Karoline Leavitt, face-off massacre, Old Guard falls. Words V's action screenshots of Cherilyn's stunned face circulated with brutal captions. When you realize you became your own meme. Cherilyn's promises aged like milk. Political commentators, celebrities, and influencers jumped into the fray, each one trying to ride the tidal wave of engagement surging under Karoline's name. Even accounts with millions of followers posted one-liners like, "This wasn't a debate, it was a public execution." On Instagram, the memes came fast and savage. Split-screen images flooded stories and feeds. Left side, Cherilyn, eyes wide, gripping the mic. Caption, before the mic drop. Right side, Karoline, standing stone cold, under the spotlights. Caption, after the mic drop. Popular meme pages with millions of followers, accounts that usually posted cat videos and celebrity gossip, suddenly pivoted. Tonight was all about face-off. In the comment sections, chaos reigned. Karoline just ended an entire generation LOL. Cherilyn looking like she hit Ctrl+Alt+Delete on her brain. Plot twist. Gen Z chose spreadsheets over songs. News alerts buzzed across lock screens. YouTube channels launched emergency live streams. Podcasts recorded emergency reaction episodes late into the night. Everywhere you turned, Karoline's name was burning through the algorithm like a match tossed into dry grass. Even celebrities tried to weigh in, some defending Cherilyn, others scrambling to jump onto the Karoline train before it left them behind. But the narrative was clear. Ding's old world was shaking. The new one was sprinting past it, memes in one hand, receipts in the other. The host's final words, spoken just before the lights dimmed, now floated endlessly across TikTok clips and viral reels. Tonight wasn't just a debate, it was a changing of the guard, and nobody could stop it. The stage was still vibrating from the social media explosion, but the host, never one to let a fire burn out, stepped back into the spotlight with a gleam in his eye. He turned slowly, facing Cherilyn, microphone raised like he was presenting her for judgment. Cherilyn, he said, voice velvet over steel, you've inspired generations. You've marched, you've sung, you've stood for justice. He paused, then dropped the hammer. But there's a rising voice among Gen Z saying your time has passed, that your message, though once powerful, no longer speaks for them. The crowd murmured, a low, uneasy wave rolling through the studio. Some heads turned toward Cherilyn, eyes wide, waiting. The host locked onto her. Tonight America asks you, are you still the voice of the youth? Cherilyn gripped her mic, breathing hard. She threw her shoulders back, summoning the old Hollywood strength she had carried for decades. I've fought for the youth longer than Karoline's even been alive, she declared, her voice shaking slightly but gaining force. I marched for women's rights before she was even born. I fought for LGBTQ rights when it wasn't popular. I fought for the oppressed when it was dangerous. Her voice rose, fueled by pride, by legacy. And today, I still fight for them, she said, almost daring the crowd to disagree. I am the voice of youth, because the youth need hope, dreams, compassion, and they need fighters who won't abandon them. Applause burst from her side of the studio, loyal, emotional, almost defiant. Some older audience members wiped at ears. The music swelled lightly behind her as if the producers tried to catch the emotional tide. But Karoline stood still, unmoved, unbothered, unbroken. She waited until the clapping faded, then she stepped into her own spotlight. Her voice was colder now, sharper. Respect to your past, Cherilyn, Karoline said, each word clipped and deliberate. You were a fighter once. The word were hit the room like a slap. But dreams without reality, she continued, are just lullabies for a generation that cannot afford to sleep anymore. Gasp. The right side of the crowd clapped first, quick, eager, surging. The left side sat stiff, rattled. Karoline's voice grew even harder. You marched for rights. You sang for freedom. You inspired hope. But Gen Z today isn't marching for dreams anymore. They're fighting for survival. She paused, letting the weight settle deep into the audience's bones. Survival from debt. Survival from crime. survival from global chaos and open borders and vanishing opportunities. Karoline took a step forward, almost like closing in for the kill. We don't have time for nostalgia anymore. We don't need ballads from mansions. We need leaders who know what it means to build, not just mourn. The host, his instincts razor sharp, fanned the flames. Karoline, he pressed, voice gleaming with mischief. Are you saying Cherilyn's message is outdated? Karoline locked eyes with the camera, addressing not just the room, but the millions watching beyond. I'm saying, she said, that a generation fighting for its future cannot afford to live in someone else's past. Boom. The room shook with noise, cheering, clapping, shouting, TikTokers already filming, phones pointed everywhere, history being captured in real time, one pixelated clip at a time. Cherilyn, desperate now, jumped back in. You think you're better because you're younger? She snapped. You think slogans about reality make you wiser than decades of experience? Her voice cracked at the edges, a sharp, painful sound. Karoline answered without flinching. Age isn't the issue, she said, voice colder than before. Relevance is. Another gasp, another ripple of awe. The host, now fully feeding the chaos, turned toward Cherilyn. Cherilyn, he said softly, dangerously, how do you lead a generation that's already moved past you? Cherilyn swallowed hard, fighting to hold her ground. I don't need them to move with me, she said fiercely. I need them to remember what we fought for. Justice, equality, hope. Noble words, emotional words. But the audience, they shifted, they fidgeted. The tides were clear. The future was no longer hers. Karoline leaned in, voice dropping to a chilling near whisper. Justice matters. Equality matters. Hope matters. She paused, slicing her gaze across the room like a blade. But action matters more. Crash. The audience detonated. Cheers, stomps, whistles, the energy so wild even the camera crews struggled to stay steady. The host, smiling wide like he had just hosted the biggest cultural moment of the decade, turned toward the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice booming over the frenzy, tonight we have not just witnessed a debate, but a transfer of the torch. He pointed slowly, first at Cherilyn, her posture heavy with history and exhaustion, then at Karoline, standing tall, defiant, electric. The question is no longer about age. It's about future versus past. He paused, savoring it. And tonight, America chose. The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and the generational war was over. The studio pulsed with unspent energy, a storm barely contained by walls and stage lights. The audience had shifted, visibly, emotionally, standing closer to the future than to the fading past. Cherilyn clutched her mic with both hands now, as if willing it to give her strength. Her face was pale, her jaw set, but her eyes were tired. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. And in that vacuum, Karoline moved, not rushing, not shouting, just stepping forward, steady as a conqueror planting her flag on new ground. The host backed away, leaving the stage and the moment completely to her. Karoline lifted the microphone slowly, deliberately. The camera zoomed in, closer, closer, catching the fire in her eyes and the steel in her voice. She looked directly at Cherilyn. No hate, no mockery, only truth. You can sing about turning back time, Cherilyn, she said, voice smooth but devastating. But you can't turn back the truth. The words dropped like a hammer, cracking the world in half. For a full heartbeat, there was only stunned silence. The kind of silence that only happens when something irreversible just occurred. And then, the eruption. The audience exploded into a full-blown frenzy, cheering, screaming, stomping, fists raised high, a sonic blast wave that shook the cameras and rattled the rafters. Phones flew into the air, screens recording every second, every shout, every flash of history being made. TikTokers were already live, Instagram, Reels already in motion, tweets already flying at the speed of light. Karoline stood still amid the storm she had unleashed, untouched, unmoved, undeniable. Cherilyn lowered her microphone slowly, the fight draining from her shoulders. Her hands trembled. She blinked rapidly, the way a queen might before stepping down from a throne she could no longer defend. The host, voice almost reverent, stepped back into frame, barely needing to speak over the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, sweeping his arm toward the stage, what you witnessed tonight was not just a debate. He pointed first at Cherilyn, who now looked smaller under the crushing weight of time, then at Karoline, who looked larger than life, standing atop the wreckage of the old order. This, the host declared, was a changing of the guard. The cameras zoomed out, the lights flared, the music swelled into a thunderous, triumphant crescendo, and as Karoline stood there, calm, composed, unstoppable, the last thing the East Ice audience saw was the future, standing fearless and unchallenged beneath the blazing lights of history. The crowd was still vibrating with energy, their cheers ricocheting off the studio walls like cannon fire. It was a storm, wild, furious, unstoppable. The host stood alone now, center stage, bathed in a single, searing spotlight. The world seemed to still for just a heartbeat as he lifted his microphone one last time. His voice dropped low, powerful, pulling the audience back in like a final tide. "Tonight," he began, pausing as the music swelled underneath him, a deep and rising crescendo, "was not just a clash of people." He turned, slowly, a deliberate, cinematic rotation, sweeping his arm across the space where Karoline stood triumphant and Cherilyn stood defeated. It was a clash of eras. A gasp rippled through the quieter pockets of the crowd, the ones still trying to process what they had just witnessed. He paced forward, slow and heavy, as the background screens flickered with clips from the night's battle. Karoline's savage mic drops, Cherilyn's desperate defenses, the audience erupting like a volcano. "We saw a generation once defined by dreams and songs," he said, his voice filled with a strange, mournful pride. "Face a generation, armed with data, action, and unstoppable resolve." The lights around the stage began to slowly dim, collapsing inward like a closing flower. We saw legacy challenged. We saw nostalgia crushed by necessity. We saw the future not ask for permission, but take its place by force. The music hit a deep, reverberating note, almost a heartbeat. The camera panned wide, capturing the stage from high above. Karoline still standing, unbroken, the light gleaming off her in sharp relief. The host smiled, not a wide smile, but a knowing one. The kind you flash when you realize history just shifted under your feet. "And remember," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried across the entire studio, "this is only the beginning." The final spotlight dimmed. The screen faded to black. The roar of the crowd echoed into the darkness, a sound that would not fade for a long, long time. The face-off stage was dark. The lights were off. The cameras were down. The crowd had long since poured into the streets, still buzzing, still talking, still reliving every blow, every gasp, every moment. But on the internet, the war had just begun. Within minutes, Karoline Leavitt's name ignited across the globe like a supernova. Karoline Leavitt trended #1 worldwide on X, not just in America, worldwide. From New York to London, Tokyo to Sao Paulo, Karoline was the name on every feed, every headline, every late-night group chat. TikTok was a madhouse. Clips of her mic drop moments flooded the For You page like tidal waves. Every other video had Karoline's cold, devastating voice slicing through the noise. Compassion without responsibility is just chaos. Dreams without reality are lullabies for a generation that can't afford to sleep. You can sing about turning back time, but you can't turn back the truth. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of shares, entire accounts created just to post edits of her standing tall under the spotlight. Meanwhile, Instagram exploded into full-blown meme warfare. Meme pages with millions of followers dropped brutal side-by-side edits. Cherilyn confused and crumbling. Karoline cold and commanding. Captions went savage. "When you bring songs to a data fight, Hollywood 0, Gen Z 1. This is what a leadership transfer looks like." Story reposts were endless. Blue-check celebrities tried to defend Cherilyn, but they were drowned under a tsunami of Gen Z users mocking the old guard's collapse. On YouTube, reaction videos sprang up like weeds after a storm. Titles flooded. The trending tab, "Karoline ends Hollywood in 60 seconds. Face-off debate analysis. The fall of Cherilyn Sarkisian. Why Gen Z just chose Karoline over Cherilyn forever." Podcasters scrambled to record late-night emergency episodes. Political YouTubers, entertainment critics, even casual commentary channels. Everybody wanted a piece of the cultural earthquake that had just hit. News networks weren't far behind. Fox News, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, they all raced to slap together breaking news segments. Split screens flashed. Karoline on one side, Cherilyn on the other. One rising, one sinking. Pundits and anchors fumbled to frame what had just happened. Was it politics? Was it culture? Was it generational warfare? The answer was simple. It was a power transfer. In real time, in full view of the world, celebrities and politicians immediately jumped into the firestorm. Some smartly, others stupidly. Some defended Cherilyn. She's a legend. Respect her. Sad to see young people turning on those who paved the way. Others praised Karoline. New leadership is here, and it's fearless. Karoline represents every hardworking American who's sick of Hollywood's lectures. A-listers clashed openly on social media. Famous singers dropped cryptic tweets. Movie stars subtweeted each other. Politicians posted awkward, desperate statements trying to look relevant. It was chaos. Beautiful, glorious chaos. And Karoline, she said nothing. No victory posts, no chest beating. She simply posted a single line on X. The future doesn't apologize for arriving. And million likes in 2 hours. By sunrise it was undeniable. A generational revolution had been broadcast live. And Karoline Leavitt was its face. She wasn't just trending. She wasn't just famous. She was inevitable. In the days following the face-off showdown, the world adjusted. But it adjusted around Karoline Leavitt. She was no longer just a rising star. She was a phenomenon. Every major news outlet crowned her the voice of a new America. Gen Z's first true powerhouse. The leader Hollywood couldn't cancel. She graced magazine covers usually reserved for pop icons and billionaires. Talk shows begged for interviews. Political heavyweights tried, and mostly failed, to ride her momentum. She trended without even trying. Every post, every appearance, every line she dropped sent ripples through TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter like sonic booms. Gen Z, the so-called silent generation, finally had a voice that didn't apologize, didn't flinch, didn't crumble under pressure. Karoline didn't just speak for them, she fought for them. She was them. Meanwhile, Cherilyn Sarkisian, once the fiery queen of cultural rebellion, faded into the background. She returned to the only place she could still draw crowds. Nostalgic concert tours, greatest hits albums, charity galas filled, with old fans clinging to old memories. On stage she still sang with power. Off stage though, the world had moved on. Her social media posts, once fiery and viral, now barely stirred the waters. Comments flooded in from younger generations, not with hate but with quiet, pitiful detachment. Respect, but your time has passed. Thanks for everything, but we need different fighters now. Legends inspire, they don't lead. She had not lost her legacy. She had not lost her music, but she had lost her place in the arena where the future was being decided. The divide was clear. The message was final. The torch had passed, and there was no turning back. Karoline did not gloat. She did not waste time dancing on the ashes of the old world. Instead, she built. Speech after speech, rally after rally, policy paper after viral post. She made it clear. She was not just here to debate. She was here to win. The headlines wrote themselves. Karoline Leavitt, Gen Z's first warrior. From talk show to title, wave, the future wears combat boots, not high heels. And across America and beyond, millions of young people finally saw a reflection of themselves, not stuck in endless protests, but marching forward, taking ground, shaping history. Karoline didn't ask for the future, she claimed it. And the world, when whether it was ready or not, when it was already moving with her.